Hey, my name's Mark Robinson and I'm a member of the Ops team here at Fresh Expressions. Today I'm chatting with Dave Cotterill. This is the Mission Shaped Podcast. Good morning, Dave. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Yeah, the sun's out and that's always makes me feel so much better about life, but really glad to be here.
I was given a list of people to chat to who have great stories. And I know you're not going to let us down, so no pressure.
Okay.
Why don't we get straight into it? And why don't you tell us a little bit about your community? Maybe about what it is and how and why it started.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess first starting with where we are in the world. So we're in a place in southeast London called Deptford, which is next door to. Well, I have to say, when I explain to people where we're at, because nobody knows where Deptford is. It's next to Greenwich. When I was been to Greenwich, still like the O2 and the Royal Parks and stuff like that. So it's kind of Deptford is Greenwich's kind of poor neighbour, historically speaking. Greenwich is where all the admirals and stuff live, and Deptford was where all the sailors, the brothels, the pubs were. So it's kind of tucked in between Greenwich and I guess London Bridge is probably the next kind of recognisable space.
Right.
But it's really cool, interesting, uncomfortable, exciting place to live. It's many things like I guess London is rich in diversity. It's got its history. Yeah, I mentioned kind of sailing history it's got, but it's got some uncomfortable history as well. That's always good to know your history. I guess we'll come back to that later. But my community is called Soul Community. It's a network of people that are exploring well-being and spirituality in lots of different ways. It presents itself in various forms outside of church buildings, in other people's spaces, and it's always evolving. And I think when I think of London, particularly this area of London where this gentrification is been really pushed, you're getting lots of people coming and going, and that is the way of it. And likewise, Soul Community is always moving, it's always evolving, we're just trying our best to see what is helpful to the community, what is possible with the community, with is an important word, and really to understand really where God is really moving, and more often than not, Mark, in the places where we least expect it. But it's been great. It's been a great journey.
So tell us about the why. What inspired you to get involved in this community, and how did it be?
Yeah, well, we're from the Salvation Army tradition, and I guess like most church traditions at the moment are working out what's dealing with the numerical reality of churches, I guess, in terms of decline, working out that sitting with that reality and working out what's needed, whether it needs to pivot or try something complete new. And Salvation Army, as you probably knows, is kind of a key and has been within the Fresh Expression movement. And kind of, it seems a long time ago now. 10 years in some senses is a long time, in other senses not. But we my wife and I, had lived in Deptford for a while. We'd attended the local Salvation Army church. And that feeling in your stomach where something needs to change, and more often than not, God's calling you to do something. And we were just really working out what that really meant, and we didn't have the answers. And Guy Andrew Vertigan, who headed up the Fresh Expression movement within the Salvation Army, kind of saddled alongside us at one conference and kind of just said, what about this, guys? I know you're passionate about people outside the church. You're creative. Yeah, Kerry Smart wife has always been passionate about people outside the church, particularly young people. And is this something that perhaps God's calling you to? And he listed off the characteristics of the pioneer, and it was just, check. Yeah, that's us, check. That's, and it was really, I don't know what the word was. It felt like an invitation we couldn't really refuse. And we were given the opportunity. The Salvation Army were really gracious and excited to have to try something new. And we went for it. And yeah.
I wonder how many sort of communities are exist because of the influence of the mighty Vertigan. His reputation is eternally brilliant. Love the guy.
Yeah.
So then, tell us then a little bit. So you were inspired to do things differently. I assume that you probably were in that category of people where the run-of-the-mill stuff didn't quite hit it for you, felt there was something more. So what specifically was the inspiration for the Soul Community, and what does that look like, sort of?
Yeah.
From a day-to-day. Sorry, let's. The benchmark is most people think of church outside of the Fresh Expressions movement. Most people think of church as being sitting in a nice building, maybe in pews, maybe around tables, what have you, maybe a bit of worship and a bit of preaching, but a bit of that kind of thing. Most people get that as the idea of church. In the Fresh Expressions movement, most people understand that church can be anything. So what does Soul Community look like from a point of view of worship, and what inspired specifically that?
Yeah, well, I should start with we were asked not to start anything up for a year, and I'll start there because that's with most Fresh Expressions as I know it anyway, and as you'll have, all of us will have seen the cycle, the Fresh Expression cycle. You start with that listening, and I have to say from a Salvation Army perspective, where we are, Keris and I, my wife, were brought up in the Salvation Army, doing for others, doing stuff, helping, and all that is really valued. But to be told not to do that, formally anyway, was a bit of a jar, but gave us real opportunity to kind of, really seek out, listen, get to know people. And it's just so, it just sounds so basic, but it's just so key. And we would just ask questions of people, make friends with people. People would invite us out, invite us to their houses for dinner. It was like revolutionary because, it didn't really happen to us before. So like we were connecting with lots of people in lots of different spaces. And where we'd often ask the question, kind of what, we're obviously we've got these roles within the Salvation Army and the church. Kind of what does the community need of the church at the moment? And what would come back more often than not would be this well-being, kept coming back, mental health. We live in a really, really busy, intense part of London, which we love. It's a double-edged sword in many ways. It's amazing diversity of people, but it's exhausting. There are all sorts of things. I can open my door to anything any day. Police tape, a fight, lovely things as well. But it's an intense place to live, and that really affects people. And so that kind of well-being and mental health thing kept coming back to us, and we wondered what that might look like. What would church look like with that? As its kind of lens, I guess. And so I guess naturally, like many of us, perhaps many of us that have kind of shifted away from noisy churches with music and loud preaching and lots of people, I guess we decided and felt comfortable with moving into the more contemplative practices of the church, which we were not brought up with. So it was all new for us as well, which I think was helpful for people to kind of understand as well. Like, this was new for us as well. It wasn't us kind of bringing this kind of thing. You know, this is good for us. You know, it might be good.
Yeah.
We were doing it together, figuring it out together, and we came across the take time meditation stuff. Well, I don't know if people have come across that, but I think came from a guy in the Methodist Church. Really helpful. I mean, when that came along, it was just gold. You know, really helpful kind of 20 minutes meditation, kind of breathing and silence and dropping you in on a story of Jesus, and just asking you the kind of question you get opportunity to ask Jesus and share with Jesus whatever's on your heart, whatever's on your mind. And we did that in person and we did that online, particularly during COVID. And that's sort of stuff's just been really helpful, using kind of examine prayers. But we also started experimenting with art. When you come for a visit to Deptford, Mark, you'll see street art everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just great. You know, it makes the place come alive. And I decided, actually off the back of some study I was doing with Church Mission Society, to write some meditations in and around these street art, this street art that was everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I did that during COVID, where you know, we obviously were not allowed to kind of hang out with each other as much, but we were able to go to the shops at those times. And I really wanted people to have landmarks in their day on the way to Asda or their kids off at school, whatever, and remember these kind of meditations, whether they be on compassion, justice, care. I can't remember some of the others off the top of my head, but kind of we used art a lot. And Deptford is famous. I say famous. I saw it in a documentary that, you know, Deptford's got more artists than anywhere else in the UK. So it's a very, very creative place. And so tapping into that sort of stuff felt good, felt right, and people enjoyed it, whether they were of faith or not. It was, and we continue to use those spaces, really. We also use, we're right on the banks of the River Thames, Mark, and the river's just become a really important landmark for us. You know, as I mentioned, it's a really, Deptford's very intense. But there are spaces in the area like the river where you breathe. And so we've written a lot of meditations in and around that. We've started producing our own walking meditations, where we record. This is accompanied by beautiful music and usually has a topic, and we do that in groups. Walk along the river for half an hour, come back, chat on the way back, and it's just been really, again, just a really natural, interesting and lovely way to kind of connect with people and offer them something gently of the Christian faith that's helpful to them.
I hear that. So I should have said at the beginning, I'm also in London, but over in West London. And I'm not massively familiar with Deptford. I have been through Deptford, so when you're talking about like art everywhere, it's one of the things I loved seeing. I always think it's it reminds me a little bit of with all the art of Shoreditch, but it's got the river. More, I think. But I think it's fascinating to think about operating in a space where you've got the intensity of the city. Yeah, because where we are in West London, where it's very suburby, it's very chill, and there is that thing of like, closer you go into the heart of London, you pick up on that vibe of it just gets busier, the pace pickens up, and the pace pickens up rather. And
sirens and noise and arguments.
Life
and people selling stuff. It's life.
Yeah. What about, so tell us about, and I mean, this might feed into it. Tell us about what the sort of significant challenge has been to sort of, in either when you were getting going or in just the day-to-day of it. What are the biggest challenges that you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, it's let's be honest, that anyone starting anything new, whether it's a business or whatever, it's a challenge to start with nothing. To start with nothing and build something out of the dust. There's a challenge, and I think we were a bit young and naive, and we didn't have kids at the time, and just thought everything was possible. And I guess we know that is true. That it's written in the Bible that things are possible. But I think I think not until we put our feet on the ground and we realised that really we didn't have a building. We didn't have any money really. They gave us a little bit of money just to kind of meet people for coffees and stuff like that. All we had was ourselves, Mark. Oh. And I remember my father-in-law kind of reading we just kind of used to do quarterly reports. My father-in-law just said, you are offering yourselves as living sacrifice, your bodies every day, because that's all you've got. Your gifts, your personality, like that's all you've got to go on, rather than the attractional model. Kind of look what we've got over here, smoke machines, lights and stuff like that. All you've got is ourselves. And I think that kind of dawned on us very early on that we were going to have to really dig deep, really accept that God our best hope that He's in control of this, because we're just flesh, aren't we? So I guess kind of in terms of a challenge, I think once we realised that took a bit of the pressure off us, really. I'm an introvert. If I'm perfectly honest, it was a big learning curve for me sitting in cafes, and I would, a few times I really felt that God was just saying you need to speak to this person, and I hate speaking to people out of nowhere. If I'm watching football with somebody, great, you've got some common ground to work with, music or whatever. But
that resonates deeply with me. I'm sure there's other people, but I'm an Irish introvert, so I'm happy to chat to people in context.
Oh, heavens!
Out of context, just fresh.
Yeah.
Goodness, there. Yeah.
You should do a podcast on the introvert pioneer. That'd be an interesting one. But yeah, and I guess that's a challenge. And I think expectations. I don't know if you've come across any Elaine Heath, who's theologian in America, I think, pioneering for a long time. Often talks about pioneers being lightning rods for anxious systems and churches. And I wouldn't say the Salvation Army is anxious, but we've talked about the decline of churches for some time, and I think pioneers are often there's a magnifying glass on them to see. We've given them this opportunity. Let's see what they do with it. And gosh, it better happen quick. And I think in some senses we weren't given a timeline of when they wanted whatever it was they were looking for to happen. But that was evidently a pressure, and communicating to the organisation, the powers that be, I guess, what was happening. We often refer to the Bible passage where it says the kingdom of God is like treasure buried in a field, and we really wanted to find the treasure that was out there. And I think sometimes we've got to have a conversation with people, because our treasure is different, right? So we would, we would find people that were like really up for doing stuff, or that we'd collaborate with, and we'd tell people about it, and we'd kind of just get quizzical looks. That's not my treasure. But it was real treasure to us because when you got nothing, when you meet somebody that's up for doing something with you out of nowhere, out of nothing, that's how we perceive that scripture really. So I guess kind of having conversations with the Salvation Army about with some people about this is treasure, and them not agreeing was perhaps quite tricky thing to navigate.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. It's not a unique that's not a unique problem for many fresh expressions practitioners across denominations. We see it time and time again, where again it feels like the treasure typically translates in traditional forms of church to bums on seats that you can measure.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the work that we do in this movement isn't necessarily about bums on seats, and it can look very, very different. And it's difficult for some of these institutions that are very old, that have operated in the same way for such a long time, to start thinking differently about the treasure and what's good. It was as you were talking about it, I was thinking of the idea of someone who is looking on a sandy shore, and they're looking for treasure, and they're looking for like bits of jewelry, and they're not going to be happy until they pull out like maybe a ring or a little necklace of jewelry, and they pick up all these sort of brownish rocks and they toss them to the side. But the other guy who comes along, picks up these brownish rocks, gives them a polish, and there's little nuggets of gold, which are going to be far more valuable than the little gold necklace, because that gets melted down and refined into something beautiful and new. And it sounds,
that's great.
Very similar kind of journey, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing with that treasure is to really cherish it. It's not for our use. These people are not for our, for our purposes, to feel good about what we're doing, or to communicate, or even to communicate to people. Look at this. These are God's treasure, and to really treasure that and sit with it and get to know these people, and it is really, really important. Really important.
Yeah. Tell me then a little bit. So it's again, it's a common thread. So we talk about this a lot. Pioneering is lonely. And even when you have a great amount of support and from your denominational leaders or the people around you, it's still within the context where we're talking about, sometimes people just don't get it, and they're still saying, okay, but what's successful and all that, and that can be isolating in some ways. And so we recognize that it can be sometimes a lonely journey. So what is it that you guys do to keep yourself rooted, to keep yourself well, to keep yourself healthy, spiritually, mentally, physically, all of that? How does that work out for you to keep grounded?
Yeah, it's such a key question, and I think the first thing I would say is staying connected to some kind of faith group in some way, and we connect with a Salvation Army church here as well. If I'm honest, for our kids' sake, we don't do any kids' work within our community really, but just being part of another group that's working out things and that's healthy and good for you. I think just being rooted in that kind of space is really important for us anyway. I took on some study with Church Mission Society, and I got to tell you, that's revolutionary in terms of my theological understanding of things. What was happening on the ground. in front of our eyes? Was it matching up with how I understood God at work? And being able to have those spaces, great teaching from, people like Johnny Baker and people like that. Just really, really brilliant in terms of making you feel like you're not completely crazy in thinking things and questioning things.
Yeah.
I think there's an element of deconstruction within as far as I'm aware, in terms of connecting with pioneers, there's an element of deconstructing within pioneering, because you are leaving behind a system, a way of working, a way of understanding, gathering, worshipping. You are leaving it behind, and that is costly. And to be working that stuff outside of your context as well, in this case, Church Mission Society, has, not a plug, by the way, but
we love the
great.
Church Mission Society.
Yeah. Really, really helpful. You can, and within that, you're visiting places all over the country, doing lots of different stuff. And I think that's been the other part of it, you probably get a good insight into this, Mark, just seeing the diversity and the imagination of different people in different contexts, whether it's boxing gyms, farms, I don't know, sport, music, it starts opening your mind and allowing you, I could do this. That is possible. So that's been a really important part of staying sane, probably. But I'm really passionate about having a life outside of this thing, which is hard because you live incarnationally, and 1 minute you're walking down the street getting your bread from the shop, and the next someone will come up to you, tap you on the shoulder, and you're working, kind of, or are you? I don't know, straight away. And having life outside, we talked about camping before, Mark. Especially you live in the city, you got to get out.
Yeah, got to
get out and breathe the fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
The sea air, the country air, whatever it is. I play football every week with a group of guys that I kind of don't really know that well, but it's the anonymity is great. I just go play football, blow off some steam, but I have to say, by and large, the activities that we do within Soul Community are life-giving.
Wow.
That they are not drains, and that's something that we're really, really careful to kind of make sure that if something's becoming a drain or a life sapper, it's probably time to kind of critique it a bit.
Okay.
So one of the things which is often people say that must drain the life out of you. I lead this choir in our local pub. So I was a musician before, Mark. I still am, but we decided that we'd start this choir up, good for mental health, and something that there was a student at Goldsmith College, which is down the road from us, that really wanted to do it with us. So we thought, let's go for it. Well, it's been the best thing. I've probably been able to be part of. Massive group of people. We sing in this local pub right in the middle of Deptford High Street. Great people. We have so much fun, and we have fun, but there's space for not being great as well. Karis and I personally have had more than our fair share of grief over the last 2 years, and that's something that everybody at some point goes through, and so we've been able to hold space for that in that space in particular. But it's been by and large been life-giving. Okay. So having a life outside of stuff, very key. Well, book your getting away as much as you can. But my encouragement would always be, as best you can, make sure your stuff's life-giving. Can't always be so. We're with people, and we have responsibilities for people, and we're sitting in some really tragic situations. But that would be my encouragement to people.
Good stuff.
And to myself. I'm talking to myself as well.
That sort of leads us on. There was another question I was going to ask, but you're sort of rolling on to the question I always ask everyone about: what do you say to people to inspire others who are thinking of starting a journey, either whether it be just the fledgling ideas that they're not comfortable in their traditional church, or they might have an idea, or they might be doing stuff and thinking of something new. What do you say to people who are at that stage who are thinking about doing something new?
I think firstly, that's the start of the journey, isn't it? And it's so exciting when someone musters up the courage to say, actually, I think I want to do something different. I don't fit here. I think this is where I want to go, and that's always really exciting. I think key skills of pioneering are of course, and always should be listening. I talked about that first year of listening. But we should always be listening really, really carefully, building that into our practice, our weekly practices. I had something else in my head, which was really brilliant, I'm sure. But what else would I say to people? This will be a bit for editing, Mark, I would have thought. What else would I say to people? I think it's about, and we've said it before, it's just staying connected to people. I think I think people are really pushing into coaching and mentoring within pioneering. I think people are seeing that as that's something that we need. I think and people are kind of hearing that now. We don't really need managing. That's different. We need coaching, which is kind of bringing your ideas and bringing your insecurities to a space where someone can gently reflect back to you, kind of, what's possible, and kind of holding you a little bit accountable to that. But I think there's just so many different types of organizations. This podcast. There's all sorts of podcasts around that can help you. Church mission site training. There's a lot of stuff around. But I think for different people it would be, it's not a one size fit all within pioneering. So yeah, I did have something else there, Mark, which it'll probably come back to me right at the end.
Yeah, it probably will. That's all right. Let me ask you this then as well.
Go on.
Where I realize, without necessarily having to name specific people or anything like that, but where have you seen transformation in people? Where have you seen God moving, I guess, in the people that you're working with?
I think transformation is a really big word, and I'm sometimes reluctant to use it in my language. It's quite dramatic. It kind of reminds me more so of my more evangelical days, which were great days when we used to see dramatic things happening. And if I'm honest with you, we've not seen that sort of transformation, certainly in that sense. But I think where I've seen transformation most is when people are collaborating and being with each other. I think one of the key skills for pioneering that we do is building trust, and that's really important because not everybody is trustful of organisations and of churches. There's enough Netflix documentaries and Disney documentaries to paint the church in a different light. And so there's a lot of work to do in that sense. But when we do build that trust and when we do bring people together and we collaborate, I start to see little glimpses of the kingdom of God where I never thought there would be, where people bring their skills and talents together and start creating spaces and ideas and initiatives that make my area of depth better, more hopeful. And I think that's my scorecard these days for transformation. A great example of that is we were invited. I don't know if you went past Deptford Market, Mark, no, on your trip to Deptford, but it's a proper old school Southeast London market. It's pretty hairy at times. It's fun. My mate invited Keris and I actually to kind of sit on his coffee stall there. He just started there, and this is one of the just great stories. And he invited us just to be there, be around. What an invitation to be part of. We got talking with a few of the guys on that coffee stall, including my mate. And he was particularly passionate about people that he was seeing in the market that were, were struggling a bit out of it. Could do with a job. He was always being asked if there was a job going. And so we created with another guy that we met, Peak Coffee Academy, which is it trains young people basically to pour coffee. Like it's the biggest growing industry in the world, probably coffee at the moment. Growing coffee, selling coffee shops, it's all around. And so out of that kind of idea that and that kind of need and that kind of bringing together skills, there was this kind of transformation in all of us to kind of be vulnerable, I guess. We all shared why we were doing what we were doing. I brought my faith into it. My mate brought into kind of his longings to kind of serve the community. And I kind of saw, as a result of that, I've got pictures up on my wall of these guys, young people that had turned up to college from all parts of the globe on their entry-level eSoul group, had no English language, and we were all of a sudden providing opportunities for these young people to train in making coffee, and some of them went into to work. So it's just amazing, and that's kind of the way I see transformation in that sense. The meditations I've mentioned before, that moment, particularly with the take time meditations where, after the Jesus story, whoever's leading the meditation will say, and now share with Jesus whatever's on your heart, whatever's on your mind. There's silence, and then there's opportunity to reflect after that. Some of the stuff that comes back from particularly the people that aren't Christian is really, really wonderful. Sometimes people don't say anything, but sometimes somebody will say something that's like, gosh, I've totally learned from you. And I'm being transformed in the process, of course. I'm not sorted out, but far from it. So it's kind of like this mutual reconciliation of people that I see transformation these days.
I'm realizing as you've been chatting, in even how because I often ask people that question, about where have they seen people transformed, kind of thing, and you, I think you rightly pointed out where it's a very narrow view that I'm asking that question, which I'm guilty of leaning back on the old style of ultimately that's about numbers, because it's how many people have you brought to faith, how many people have been converted to your church, how many people have done that, and we realize that for I think the majority of people coming to faith or anything like that, because obviously we want people to know the loving amazingness and grace of Jesus. But that's not an overnight thing. For some people, that can be instantaneous, and that can be a dramatic evangelical style conversion experience, if you like.
Yeah.
But for so much more people, it's a really slow burn.
Yeah.
And it's people will suddenly, you can ask people like, when did you think of yourself as someone who follows Jesus?
Yeah.
I always find it really interesting when people go like, oh gosh, I don't know, it just
kind of happened.
It happened. It's happening more and more because it's I guess in our society today, people don't want to be sold Jesus. People run away from the marketing more so these days.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of the word simmering, Mark. Selena Stone in a I don't know if you come across much of her work, but talks about simmering and how a good stew. She talks about Caribbean stews that her mum used to make. Be cooking for hours, and I think we got to be careful in some senses that we don't move too quickly. We don't figure out things too quickly, if that makes sense. But like, in some sense, I've been doing this for 8 years, which for some people is a very long time. But in other senses, it is no time at all. And working out all this deep work in the soil, I guess, theological work, people work, it's something that needs to simmer sometimes. And I think I would just encourage anyone that's supporting anyone in pioneering is just to allow that simmering to take place, rather than kind of, gosh, when is it going to happen? What's going? When are they going to do this? When are people going to say those words? Which is hard, and that takes nerve, and that takes a lot of boldness, I think, particularly if you are funding something, or if you're particularly looking for one result.
Dave, we've gone way over our time, and I feel that this is where we've gone. We start to get into a really interesting topic right towards the end, and I'd love to talk more, but I think this is a good place to end, where people can unpack this a bit more in their own discussions, and certainly I know we'll be unpacking this, because us, as the operations team for the charity, we're constantly trying to look at what are the key topics that are coming out of these conversations, and there are some really interesting threads that are coming out that you've touched on. But again, this whole idea of what actually, when we talk about transformation, what does that look like? What does success look like for a fresh expression? That we can sit with ourselves and not feel pressured, because we recognize that feeling pressured to do something is a really toxic trait for this work. But also recognizing that we are accountable to other either denominational leaders or funding bodies or what have you, that we can at least start to translate in a really good and healthy way what it does mean. But there's a whole other conversation about it. But I will say, Dave, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
It's been great. We may need to have another chat and have you on again and unpack some of this other stuff. And who knows, we may well do that. But really appreciate your time. Really appreciate it. I'm not just like, oh gosh, there's so much to think about. But let's stop it there.
Well, I'm just always happy to I just really appreciate telling my story, and I think telling your story is the most powerful thing you can do.
Yeah. Thank you for doing so. We, the team, will be praying for you, and we will pray that, God's Spirit with you, and you are encouraged in all the right ways. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being on.
Thanks, Mark.
If you want to catch up and find out more about Dave's community, you can find them on Instagram at SoulCommunitysSA. If you want to connect with us, you can do so via our socials and through our main website. All of that is on freshexpressions.org.uk. And finally, if you've been inspired by what you've heard today, but you're unsure of where to start, Godsend is our amazing toolkit for creating new Christian communities. There's loads of practical advice and real life stories. It's a brilliant starting point. So visit godsend.cloud. Take care.